welcome to the Startup Grind.
He's actually been featured in Entrepreneur magazine. They called vWorker one of the 100 most brilliant companies on our radar, and it was a 4-year consecutive Inc. 5000 fastest growing private company in the United States. He's now the CEO of Peanut Butter and Jelly Games, and we'll talk about that as we get through, which is basically a 60-second puzzle gaming platform. And he's been interviewed by CBS, Fox News, The Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and I could keep going for a really long time. Please give a warm round of applause to Ian. Awesome. So I'm going to go through and kind of ask some questions. We'll kind of skip around a little bit. But I want to ask Ian, kind of starting out, what were you like as a kid?
I was pretty geeky. I grew up in Kennedy Space Center, so it was, that coast of Florida, around NASA and everything like that. My dad actually worked at Kennedy Space Center. He was an engineer. He worked on the Apollo missions. He was in the control room. So I was always into like technology and stuff like that. So the things that are interesting, I was into technology and math, and I was into like solving puzzles. Like when I was in the 6th grade, the Rubik's Cube came out. So I was just wanting to solve that Rubik's Cube constantly. And eventually actually wrote a computer program to do it. That was my science fair project.
There you go.
So yeah, so that's what I was like.
That's pretty cool. So you kind of grew up with that. What did your mom do?
So my mom, she was a teacher. So, okay. And actually my mom is actually, I'm half Malaysian.
Yes.
And so actually half Chinese. She lived in Malaysia, half Chinese and half Italian on my dad's side. And so they met off in the Peace Corps. My mom was,
that's kinda cool.
Yeah, and my mom was a teacher. My dad was a teacher too. So, and then he came over here for his first job at NASA. And then they came over here and they had me.
Well, we're glad that happened.
Me too.
So tell me a little bit about what made you decide to be an entrepreneur, because you originally started off working in the corporate world.
Yeah,
right?
I did.
We went to college, came out, did the very traditional thing, worked for some big name companies.
Yep, I did. Well, it actually really started much earlier. It started when I was probably like, when that was like 7th or 8th grade. And I remember we went into it was like a carnival at our school. Okay. And we had a booth where we were trying to raise money. So my mom was selling, she basically was like, well, what can we do to help out raise money for the school? So she was like, well, we could do egg rolls and rice, because my mom is Chinese, right?
Of course.
So she cooks, and she's a really good cook. So basically, I was like, hey mom, can I help? So I did, and I remember that was the first experience that I actually had of like creating a product and getting people liked it. I mean, they loved her food, and then getting paid for it. And I was pretty young, and I was like, I like this.
Good.
Yeah, this is really good. I gotta find some way to do this. So that was kind of like the first little taste of it. But it took me a while to kind of really find my way. I guess you're right. I went the traditional route of just going in and just working, for other companies and stuff like that. But actually, I think it was good because it gave me that experience to kind of, first of all, I could see how the corporate world worked, which was really useful later on when you need to approach these types of people.
Right.
And, but also it kind of just gave me, I could see, oh, you know what? I don't know why they're not doing this, or why aren't they doing this? And it kind of gave me the experience that I could have
some
to
of the
go,
problem-solving
some
skills.
of the problems that were there. Yeah. So
Okay.
it ended up helping.
That's pretty cool. So I'm going to come back a little bit and kind of talk about the companies in a second.
Okay.
But I heard that you kind of have a habit that you have to make you more productive. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Which one? Maybe I have a bunch of, I'm like a creature of habit.
Before you go to bed?
Oh, well, maybe you're talking about, it's like.
No, I'm not talking about that. Different kind of productive.
Want that discussed. I think I know which one you're talking about, but basically I kind of do a visualization thing.
Yeah.
And I do it right before I go to bed and right before I wake up. And I just find that that's the time where it's like it's so, your day is so busy all day long and there's a million things that are interrupting. And those are the times, where there's no interruptions for me. So, I just kind of sit there and I usually think about what problem am I working on? And to be honest, I don't do it as much at nighttime because then I'll be up all night. Right. So I've kind of like stopped doing that. Typically now I'm more doing it in the morning. So, and I'll just wake up typically in the morning and be like, okay, what am I trying to solve? And just let that half-conscious brain work on it. And so many times where I was just racking my brain and trying and trying and trying, and then all of a sudden, boom, it comes to me. So that's a little thing that I use.
I heard that you, and this is one of the things that I try to do, it's like whatever the hardest thing is on your to-do list, right?
Yes.
You try to do it early because like I think your brain's fresher. Is that kind of like the mentality?
I totally do. Yeah, I read a book, it said something about like, you eat the frog first thing in the morning.
Right.
You know, eat a frog. So it's just like, I'll pick the hardest thing that I have, and it's amazing. You pick that hardest thing, and all of a sudden it's just like the momentum that you have, you know, going through the rest of the day.
When you feel good, right? You feel good that like, hey, I was able to tackle that horrible thing that I thought was going to take forever.
I thought would
now
never
I'm
get
done, right?
Yes.
So now I'm on a roll. I'm going to like keep going.
Yes, exactly.
So it's kind of cool. Well, so let's talk a little bit about, because you've had multiple companies. You've been a serial entrepreneur. So tell us what the first product was that you built.
It's like, you know, the first products were pretty scary.
Yes.
Pretty much a disaster. The very, very first product was the power launcher.
Right.
And I put so much time and effort into this. I thought, so this was a long time ago. So this is late 90s. And I was into computer programming, and I thought, I'm going to create this product that's going to launch programs on the people's desktops. Now, at the time, like I invested, you know, months in creating this, learning the computer language to try to program it. And the things I didn't do any market research to find out if anyone wanted it. I didn't ask anyone if, you know, what would you like in this? I didn't do anything. So I just went in my little room and I coded, and I came out with this program. And that thing.
How many people bought that?
Yeah, none. No one ever bought a single copy. So it was a complete, utter failure.
And the reason I bring that up is because I think in, you know, a lot of people, and particularly in our community, I think we have this aversion to failure. And I'm a pretty big believer that failure teaches you a lot. And so you should fail a lot of times, which I know is one of your philosophies.
Yes, I have failed numerous times. I mean, it took 4 or 5 different things, just trying different products and doing things before I got to the first one where I go, you know what, I'm kind of happy with this. It's making enough where I feel comfortable with it. But each time I learned something new. And yeah, I totally agree with you. The failure is really, really important. A few people seem to get lucky and are just like, that first time out of the gate, you know,
that's
they
like
just
1 in 100 million now.
I know. That's what I think.
Number. It's
that's
like,
what I think too. It's just like, you know, you see it in the press and you see all that sort of thing. But, you know, when you talk to real people, it's just like, it's never the first time.
Right.
And it's over and over and over again, but each time getting a little better.
So let's talk a little bit about your journey, right? So so after that, right?
Yes.
You actually ended up starting a company, right, out of et cetera, which was called Planet Source Code.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that. Like my understanding is it's like $1,000 in your spare bedroom. Is that pretty close to reality?
It was even less probably.
And you were still working as an engineer, so you were working full time.
So I was working full time,
job.
and I was like, and it was a side job, and I thought, you know what, this would be really cool. This is also a long time ago. This is late 90s. So I was like, it would be really cool if there's some place where programmers could like share their source code. So this was before open source and all that stuff had been invented. So there wasn't really any place to do that. And so I just kind of created it on the side because I thought it would be useful. And you know, it took a while to grow. It wasn't like an overnight success.
Right.
But you know, within probably about like 2.5 to 3 years, it slowly grew. Every month was a little bit more. And then, I mean, by the time it was going well, there were millions of people coming to it every single month. So
you were making some pretty good coin right off of advertising back then. Right?
Yeah, you do your research. Yes.
But then there was like this horrible thing called a .com boost, and like guys who were paying like 60 cents per 1,000 impressions went to paying like 2 cents or something crazy like that.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So that had to be a little painful.
Yeah, it was extremely painful. So it was one of those crises where it's just like everything that I had built and constructed, I finally had something that worked, you know? And it just all came crashing down. It was, so you referenced it, basically it was, you know, $60 to show a tiny little ad, to show like a little 460 by 60 banner for every 1,000. I had millions of people coming. Right. So it was making really good money for not a lot of work.
Right.
And no staff. So fantastic business, and I thought, okay, this is it. This is my ticket. .com crash came, and instantly, you know, overnight people were like, oh, you know what? We can't pay our bills. You know, can we pay our advertising bill next month? Okay. And can we pay it next month? They keep putting it off.
Well, the other thing people don't realize too is like back in that time, right? You had to host this stuff. It wasn't
That's
like
right.
today where like I get some share somewhere and it cost me like $20 a month. It was a little different scenario.
Yes. I had 61 lines running to my house. So
at what, like $1,500, $2,000 a
That's
piece.
right, each one. And it was a year-long lease to get these things run to my house so I could have enough internet connection. There was no broadband. So I was like, I am in trouble if my advertisers are all drying up now and I got no money coming in. I got all these bills. What the heck am I going to do?
So what did you do? That's a good question.
So I just, you talked about like how I make my decisions. So I was like, I tried to get, because I was really stressed out.
Yep.
And I thought, I got to kind of get myself still. I got to kind of like get out of my head and just kind of like calm down. Once I was able to do that, I thought, you know what? I still have this valuable resource. No one's willing to pay for it anymore because all the advertisers are totally out of business. But, I've got over 1 million people coming into this thing every month. How can I monetize that in some way? And I had a couple of different ideas of like maybe I'd build like developer tools or something.
Sure.
But I thought, you know what? The thing they keep on doing over and over again, bugging me with actually, was that they would be like, Ian, I have this program. Can you please create this for me? Can you please do this for me? Please, please, please. And I'd be like, no, I
don't have time for that.
I don't have time for that stuff.
Right.
Exactly. I'm trying to run this site. And I thought, you know what? I think that's it. I think that's really the need that's not being met. So I thought, I'm going to create a site.
You kind of knew you had a built-in audience then, right? At least,
Yes.
I mean, there were enough people coming asking for help.
Yes.
You knew you had customers, potential customers at least.
Yes, exactly. And I had the people to fulfill it because I was like, well, if I can connect them together with these programmers,
Right.
then that would solve the problem. But there were problems too because it was like, well, shoot, who's going to trust someone over the internet that they're just hiring? They trust me because they know me. I'm the webmaster.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to come up with some solutions to a bunch of things to make this work, where it would actually have a chance of doing something.
So it's pretty cool. So you ended up starting RentACoder, right? Was
Yes.
the first site, right? So it's like all about developers and that kind of thing. So what were some of the initial challenges you had? So I mean, you obviously had some customers who were interested,
Yes.
right? But now you've got to kind of build that audience, right?
Yes,
And figure out how
yes.
you connect people who are interested to some other places. So you starting a marketplace.
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, I mean, the biggest problem, like I said, was the kind of like the credibility. Like, how do you connect two parties together who have no idea, who they are? So, and I thought, well, maybe I could do something like eBay with like ratings and things like that.
Yeah, you actually call the eBay of programmers at one point.
Yeah.
There was a quote like in Forbes, I think, that
Yes.
called you like the eBay of programmers.
So that was kind of like the model. So, but the one thing I'd never liked about eBay ratings was that they could, people sometimes they write false ratings.
Of course.
So you can't always trust them. So I was like, well, we have to somehow make it better than eBay. So I thought, you know what? What would be cool is if we created ratings. So like I would rate maybe. So let's say that I did work for you.
Okay.
You would rate me, but I wouldn't be able to see your rating, and I would rate you, but you wouldn't be able to see my rating. And then only once we both did that, then we would kind of like raise the doors so that you could see what was going on. So I thought, okay, that's good. So now I can get people to rate each other accurately. But still, there's going to be people who cheat. There's going to be, all sorts of problems. So I thought, you know what? This is going to require creating some processes, some business processes. So basically, I created an arbitration process.
Okay.
And so, which ended up becoming like its biggest pain, but it was really crucial.
But also something that was a little different, right? I mean, you were technically, as you kind of went on, you're competing with some other marketplaces
Yes.
who didn't really have anything like that.
Yes. In fact, I mean, unbeknownst to me, I guess I made the same mistake that I made the first time with the power launcher. I didn't realize all my competitors, and there were definitely some who were there first. And but thankfully, I did. So many people like copy what the competitor is doing. Because I didn't know about them, I didn't copy them. I just kind of came up with it, and none of them had the idea that, we need to do something to make the transaction safe. And basically, I set it up so with this arbitration process, there's a money back guarantee to the person putting in the money. If they don't get what they want, the money goes back to them. And at the same time, there's a payment guarantee to the worker. So if they do the work, they are also going to get paid. So I was able to do guarantees both ways, and no one was able to do that, and they didn't want to do it. And so that was a nice competitive advantage for many years.
So did they put money in escrow? I mean, so the
Yes.
person who's hiring put money in escrow somewhere?
Yes, exactly. So, like if you were hiring me, your money, rather than paying me directly, because I might just run away with it, right?
Sure.
So yeah, which
We've heard about that before.
Yes, it does happen. So it's making sure I don't do that. So the money is placed in escrow. Then once I finish the work and give it to you, then you say, okay, yes, I approve the money to be released. But then if you don't approve it, then that's when it goes into arbitration. And then the arbitrator goes, oh yeah, you didn't get what you asked for. Here's your money back. Or, I mean, sometimes the buyers cheat too. So they're like, look, you got everything you asked for, the money goes to the worker.
Right. So arbitration is interesting because that was something that was kind of unique to what you guys had. Like nobody had it for a long time, even when you were being acquired, right? I mean, there was
Yes.
like, it's not something that existed elsewhere. So I think that was a unique advantage that you had in the marketplace. How do you deal with arbitration where, let's say I hire Ian or whoever the workers on the other side, right? And now we're unhappy, and so we disagree on how to shoot. Who was doing the arbitration? I mean, like, you kind of had a conflict of interest there, right?
Well, you could look at it as a conflict of interest. If we, I mean, in a way, if...
Well, maybe if you weren't working for someone else. So at the point
Yes.
you quit your job, right? You quit your full-time job, and now you were full-time in the business, then that would probably have
Yes,
changed that a little
right.
bit.
Well, yeah, as a company, we don't have a conflict of interest because obviously we want to push the money in the right direction.
Of course.
Right? So then that way we'll have more good repeat customers. But actually it was a challenge. Basically, at the beginning it was only programming. So at least I was able to focus just on hiring programming arbitrators. So I hired a whole bunch of different technical people basically.
Right.
But then eventually it expanded off into all sorts of things, translations,
Right.
Technical design. So I had to hire a lot of talent for that. That and customer service was pretty much all of the staffing.
So you were kind of creating a trust environment, for lack of a better thing, right? Because you had all these people who had never met each other. I mean, remote working is not an anomaly. I mean, it kind of was when you first got started.
Yes.
Because you were starting this like in 2000, 2001.
Yes.
So that wasn't a trend then. I mean, it's a trend today. But even back then, right, I would go to my employer, let's say, and I worked for IBM or whoever, right? Now I'm a remote worker. They know me.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And I know my employer. But when I'm contracting someone I've never met who maybe is in Malaysia,
Yes.
for example, right? Then I have no idea whether I can trust this person or not.
Yes. Yes. So it's a totally different ballgame. I mean, we even had to, and then you don't know if you can trust me, and then I don't know if I can trust you either to pay. So a whole bunch of things to do to make it a trust environment.
So how many of the deals as you went through, right, as the company began to grow, how many of the deals had to be arbitrated? Like is there a percentage?
Yeah, there is a percentage. It actually was really good. At the beginning was not great. The beginning was horrible.
At the beginning, you're doing something different, so that's kind of to be expected.
Yes, exactly. The beginning, so I was like, we're losing a ton of money on this. We've got to get the process down. So after like getting Wizard set up so that buyers would know the questions to ask and so they wouldn't get ripped off and not do stupid things, I got it down actually to 11%, which, the average software failure rate is something like 70% or something like that, for not on time or not on budget or, not by the deadline. So I was able to get really, really far down. So I was pretty happy with that.
That's kind of interesting. Okay, that's actually pretty good.
Yes.
I think there's some enterprise companies who would be happy with that number.
Yes, exactly.
From that perspective. So I want to kind of turn the tables a little bit. Talk a little bit about, like, you've never raised money really, right? So how did being self-funded, right, and not raising capital impact your choices as you're growing your business?
Oh, yeah, it impacted them all the time because it impacted every single decision I made. By not having when you have a big cash stash.
Yeah, if I got $5 million in the bank, I can make a lot of different decisions.
You can make a lot of different decisions.
Ones, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And you can spend a lot more on your chairs. I mean, seriously,
you can buy really nice chairs.
Exactly, you buy really nice chairs. It's like we had the cheapest chairs, the cheapest.
I was actually been into your office, so I know what it looked like. It wasn't that bad, though. It wasn't.
By that time, we were able to afford a little bit better.
Okay.
Yes. But it basically, we were very, very frugal at every single step of the way, and every penny mattered. And it was like, because when every penny is going into your own pocket, it's just like you're going to look at it really, really closely, much closer than if it was for somebody else. So it was really in the DNA of the company.
But I think it's good. I think not raising capital, right? I've kind of lived on both sides of that. And, so I've raised angel money and venture money at different points. So when I first started, I raised no money. I did it all myself.
Oh, okay.
And then I went through things with big enterprise companies where products are selling for millions of dollars. You have no choice but to raise capital because your sales cycle is crazy.
Yes.
And then I went back to I don't want a boss, and VCs are bosses.
Yes, they are.
And so, I'm going to do it all on my own. And if that means that there's more risk for me, then there's also more reward in the end if I'm right. If I'm wrong, then I suffer the consequences of that.
And you were successful, so at that point, you had a little bit more of a cushion that you could take that.
In the beginning,
risk.
I had nothing, though, a lot like you, right? I mean, it's like,
yes.
you're like, okay, I'm just going to risk it all, and we'll see if this works, and if it doesn't,
sure
I'm kind of
so.
screwed.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, if it doesn't, I'm going to be eating top ramen for a really long time. So it's interesting, I know you have a thing, I read that you, I'm not sure where exactly I read it, but that you said knowing the core of your business is critical. So how do you determine what the core is in your business?
Well, I mean, obviously it depends on what the business is, but it's something that's unique to your own business that, that nobody else does. And it's something where if someone else knew what it was, that would be really bad for your company. So, there's got to be
your trade secret.
Yeah, your trade secret. It's something, like for us, it was the arbitrations. It was the arbitrations, and actually it was our customer service too. We did our customer service much better than everyone else.
Crazy letters written about your customer. Like in an age where nobody writes letters, right? Everybody tweets stuff and they post things online and stuff. Like people took time to actually write letters to you.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. I mean, or to get a letter and someone says, "Wow, you changed my life," which sounds crazy to say, but it's just like, yeah, you changed my life because because of your website and your service, I was able to afford an apartment, because people were working, or I was able to buy a car or stuff like that, or I was able to create this company that I'd never been able to before.
Well, it's interesting. I was going to actually ask you about that later, but I think that's a really big thing, right? So you've done a lot later, because when you had the money to do things philanthropically.
Yes.
Right, but you actually, because of what vWorker did, created hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Yes.
For people who basically had nothing.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. So those people were very, very grateful, but it was also a big responsibility because we were basically their paycheck. Right. So, and there's a saying, and I forget which book it was, that says, "Don't mess with someone's rice bowl," which is the fact that you're feeding someone that rice. It's like,
right?
You better get it right, and it better be down to the penny. So, they definitely were demanding. They were very demanding, but, it was only right. And so, so it was very, very gratifying to do that. So many letters. I still get letters today. On my birthday, people still send me stuff.
That's awesome, dude. I'm like, that's great.
And they're like, when are you going to start another one?
You're kind of like, I really can't. There's just non-compete thing.
I have a non-compete for a little while longer.
For a little while. Right, then maybe they can come back. So, So marketplaces are hard, right?
Yes.
So you had an idea, you created something, you had a sort of a base already because of Planet Source Code, so you could get some of those guys. But you had to grow. So talk a little bit about how you got the two sides to come to the website, right? Because now I've got the guys who code on one side, but then I've got we'll call them employers, right?
Okay.
On the other side.
Yes.
How did you get both of those guys to come to the table? Because the messaging is very different.
Yeah, completely different. And there's a chicken and egg problem like you're talking about there, where it's just like, how do you get a marketplace to work? If you don't have enough buyers, it's not going to work. If you don't have enough workers, it can't work.
Right.
So I did have that base kind of Planet Source Code to start with, but I actually specifically picked a market. I basically targeted my markets in a way to allow it to grow. So what I did was I started off as like, okay, I have a bunch of programmers. I could try to get a whole bunch of, typical entrepreneurs, for example, to go and hire these programmers. It's going to be expensive. It's going to take a long time. I don't have a ton of money. I have big financial problems, big bills. I can't
pay for all
that.
those T1 lines.
Yeah, exactly. I can't do that. So I thought, well, maybe I could tweak it somehow. So I thought, you know what? The first version of this site, it's not even going to be about entrepreneurs hiring programmers and stuff like that. It's just going to be programmers hiring other programmers. Need some extra help on your work. I already have both sides. So there's a great book, I'm sure you know, Crossing the Chasm, where
Jeffrey Moore,
yes, and he talks about this idea of the bowling alley, which is the fact that you want to set up your markets like a bunch of pins, and you knock over that first pin, and if you can knock over and dominate that first pin, it's like it knocks over other ones, and that's basically what I did. So that was the first pin, which was like programmer to programmer. So all the marketing was all about, hey, you're a programmer, you need some help programming. And then came to dominate that market. So it was like programmers knew, oh, okay, that was the place to go. Once that was dominated, then it was safe to move into the next market, which was to slightly expand it out. So I was like, okay, so the next one is going to be just starting entrepreneurs with no companies, no budget, nothing, and let's target those guys. So
guys who have an idea, but they don't have the technical acumen to actually execute that idea.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And so now it's completely different marketing, because the same thing that attracted the programmers, they would be, it's very technical, when you talk to programmers, and it wouldn't help them. So change the marketing, to attract that sort of thing. And after that worked, then again, so each time expanding it. So first it was those solo entrepreneurs, then it was the entrepreneurs who were slightly more successful. They kind of had a company, they had a budget, and then moving then to the small companies and then to the mid cap. It's just totally different messaging. By the time you get into the larger companies, they're much more conservative and more risk averse. So the same stuff that gets the entrepreneur excited is like poison to these guys, and they'll be like, okay, I don't want to do with your company. If you say, wow, we're cutting edge and this is like the newest thing, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear, oh, well, this is the respected choice, and this is what everybody is doing.
Right.
So it's just completely different.
Why they buy Cisco.
Yeah. Yep, that's right. The safe choice.
So you had a lot of things that worked for you, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about something that didn't actually work?
There were a lot of things that didn't work. I mean,
you can pick one. Pick one that really stands out for you.
Well, I mean, there were numerous times where it could have just completely, flipped the company and just gone away.
And then you would have been eating top ramen.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. I think one of the earliest times was basically, so actually the site was doing well. So we had like about, I mean, for me, I think it was for me, it was good. It was like making a couple $1,000s a month, from nothing. So I was like, okay,
but you were
fine,
still
I've got some
working,
traction.
right? Full time.
Yes, I was still working full
great,
time. Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So it's like starting to develop, some traction. It's like finally, and what happened is I got a big order. I got a big order for like $1,000, and which was a big order for me. I was like, oh, super excited. So it comes in, it gets filled, and at the end of the month, I get another letter that says, oh, by the way, you have a chargeback. I was like, what's a chargeback?
What's that? Right,
yeah, it's like, apparently it's basically, I'm going to lose $1,000 is basically what a chargeback is. So for those that don't know, it's basically, you run through something on a credit card, and in this case, it was a stolen credit card. Mm-hmm. So that money has to go back to the real owner. But here's the problem. So that $1,000 went to us, we held it in escrow, and we paid it out, and we took our 10%. So we kept 100, we paid out 900, right. And now we have to give back 1,000. So that's a $900 loss.
Of course.
And then the next day, another chargeback came in, and the next day, 3 more chargebacks came in. So all
now
of a
you're
sudden,
at $5,000.
Yeah. So I'm like, whoa, there goes. Okay, profits are all gone. We're like chewing into now
I'm going to take money from somewhere else and what do I do with
this,
right?
Exactly. Like, wow, how do I handle this? And the credit card company was like, well, do you have proof that you mailed them something? And I was like, come on, this is the internet. You don't physically mail anything these days.
Right.
Kidding me. So they were like, well, sorry, so you're gonna have to eat it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna be out of business in, probably a couple days here. Right. We don't figure out what's going on. What I found out was, so I did a little bit of research, and it was actually worse than I thought, which was the fact that there are these marketplaces where people can buy stolen credit card numbers.
Yeah, I'm in the cybersecurity business. I know all about that.
Oh, do you?
For pennies, yeah.
Yes. I mean, now there's like sites on what they call the Silk Road, which is kind of like the dark internet where you can do whatever you want to do. You can buy credit cards for very cheap. You can probably pay about 30 cents per stolen credit card. So they just buy them in bulk, and they just spend them on these websites, and they just steal the money basically from the person running the website.
Websites, gift cards, very common.
Yes. And the problem was, it wasn't like they were just like in Nigeria or, they were just in this country. They were everywhere. So how do I differentiate between all the different people? So I was like, I gotta do something about it. So again, it was like totally stressing out. Didn't know what I was gonna do. And thankfully, I had my, kind of like, she's like my lieutenant, Zoe, who had been with me from the very beginning through all my different companies and all the different attempts at making companies. And she sat down with me, and we thought, okay, we're gonna have to figure this out. And we thought, well, there's no way to tell who is good and who is bad. Okay, so there's no way to block them out. What are we gonna do? And we thought, what? The one thing these people that steal credit cards don't have, they don't have the physical credit card. And we're like, what if we quiz them on it? What if we said, okay, you gotta turn over the back of the credit card and tell us what the bank phone number is on there. And we're gonna do that on everybody that's using the site, which was gonna be like really expensive and everything like that. But, it's better than shutting down.
It's better than getting built out of half the money that you're earning every month.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So we did that, and it worked. It worked for about 3 months.
Okay.
Because they were like, man, they loved us. They'd made so much money off of us first, and they were like, okay, we're gonna find some way around this. Somehow they found some way eventually to figure out what the bank numbers are. I have no idea how.
I can tell you later.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. So again, it was like, okay, I thought I was out of it. I was like, okay, yes, we made it. It's like, boom, back in. It's like, oh no, what are we gonna do? So this was a long time ago. We thought, what we're gonna do? What we're gonna do is we're gonna call every single person that does business on the site, and as soon as they do like maybe $50 with us or something like that, and we're going to ask them a bunch of questions. First of all, we're going to have a phone number where we can reach them. So then that way we could like trace that if there was a problem. That's probably going to cut down on 99% of them. They don't want a phone number that we can trace. So we did that. Again, it was like, yes, it worked for like, a month. And then they figured out how to get around that. And I was like, oh, they set up like fake Google phone numbers. And, so it was just like, it's big money to them. It's worth the time to do this. It's like, oh man. So I was like, okay, we got to do something else. So then we were like, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to charge the card. And actually now, after we did this, maybe about a year, PayPal started doing the same thing too, and some other sites. But what we're going to do is we'll make 2 small charges on this card. And if they can tell us what the amounts are, that's got to be it. There's no way that they can fake that. And so finally that worked. It worked for about 5 or 6 years. But even that, yeah, so that was good. So it got us out of it. Even in the end, we had one guy who was able to crack that. And I don't know how he was able to crack that. So at that point, we were just like.
the bank side on the other side.
Yeah, did he have access? Maybe he was a bank employee or something. I don't know.
Could be insider, I guess.
Yeah, insider. I don't know. But somehow he cracked that. And so what we did at that point was like, we were just like, we are blocking your entire country because we have no way to know.
We just don't trust anybody there.
We blocked this country for a month and then we just opened it back up again. So we never were able to figure that guy out. But thankfully, by just
now they have this
trying
crazy
different
thing called
things.
PCI compliance, which helps with a little bit of that.
Yes,
and
it does
protects
help.
you too,
Yes,
so it's like,
yes.
But yeah, I can tell you about how the other part works.
Yeah, interesting.
So kind of going from that, right? So now you've launched your company.
Yes.
Right? You're building, you're growing. What was the one kind of strategy that really helped you grow? Like before RentACoder became vWorker, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. What was the real thing that kind of helped you grow that business?
It was really that book, to be honest. I mean, I was I was clueless. I mean, I had created several companies, but none of them had been this successful, and I really didn't know how to grow it. So I read that book, Crossing the Chasm, and it taught me how to segment the marketplaces. It talked about how you have like the adoption curve for technology, and how like at the beginning you've got just a few people that are interested, the early adopters, and how you kind of like get them to do it. And then when you get to the mid market, which is where you want to get to because that's where you're making your most money. And then at the end when you get into the laggard period, and how most companies like kind of like die in between, they fall into this thing called the chasm. And so and I was definitely in the chasm at the beginning because I just couldn't get it going, couldn't get it working. And so I used a lot of the techniques. So that was, I owe a lot to that book. It was totally random. My brother was just like, you need to read this book. You don't know what you're doing.
I hope you brought your brother something really nice.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay. All right, that's cool. So as you were growing, right, so now, first it was just you. And you're kind of in a precarious situation because you're the technical guy. So it's very unusual to have a CTO, CEO.
Right,
That's not, and I think it had to be hard for you to kind of figure out, what do I let go of as I began to grow, right? I mean,
that's definitely
because generally entrepreneurs are control freaks in the first place.
Already to start with.
Right? And then if you're the technical person, it's like, do you trust people with your code? Do you trust people like on that side? Or, on the business side, right? Do you trust people with your money?
Yes.
So how did you make those decisions? What did you do?
I guess I did it by making the wrong decisions first and then changing. Okay. Basically what I did was, so at the beginning I was like, I didn't trust anyone to do the code. Right. And I was just like, I'm the only one. So I hired my first programmer and it was a disaster. And spent a bunch of money, had to like redo every single thing that they did. And so it didn't help me. Yeah. So, actually, so it was my friend Zoe. She was like, Ian, 1, you're killing yourself. You're working all these crazy hours. 2, you're not allowing the business to grow because you need to be the CEO. You need to be like, setting up alliances with different companies. You need to be, doing all the things the CEO does. And you're sitting in here in the back, programming and doing all this stuff. Kind of like working
on the business versus in the business?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So she was kind of like, what are you doing? And so I was like, yeah, you're right, but I just don't know how. And she's like, you have to find a way. So that's what I did. And so I basically figured I have to get better at interviewing. I have to learn how to hire, which is pretty funny because we specialize in doing programmers. And
you were a developer yourself.
I know. and I mean, and in the end, I totally used my own platform to like, most of my contractors were actually overseas. But it's hard when you are having to manage a whole bunch of people and not wanting to do it yourself. So that's a totally different story. So it took a lot. So I basically had to learn. And then on each job, as I would do it, I basically would kind of like write down everything, how I wanted it done, and I created like a manual. And then I would take that manual and I would say, on the first day of the person coming in, here's what I'm expecting you to do, because I wanted everyone to be doing whatever it was. Like if it wasn't programming, like if it was the customer service.
Sure.
Because at the beginning I was doing everything. I was answering the phones.
That's normal, right? I mean, like you start out and you are the kind of the jack of all trades. You have no choice.
Yes, exactly. So I was like, well, I want it answered in a certain way. I don't want them to just. A lot of times someone answers the phone like, hey, or maybe not that bad, but it's just like there's no enthusiasm. So I said, look, before you pick up the phone, you put a smile on your face, because people can hear that. And then when you pick it up, you say, hello, this is RentACoder. I am blah, blah, blah. How may I help you? And so every single bit of the process was like laid out. And that really helped, because it went from my employees, I was constantly disappointed with them, and just, I was like, they messed up on this, they messed up on that, to the point where I could trust them and I had confidence in them and I was proud of them. And then I could let it go.
I think people too know, right? If you give people a level of expectation, right, then they kind of know what's there, so they understand what they're aiming for. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain pride, right, that exists if I'm able to like do that.
Yes.
It's funny, like in inside sales organizations, they put mirrors in cubicles. So
for the smile thing?
Yeah. So
it works.
Funny.
It totally
like,
works.
I mean, it really, people can tell the difference when you're talking, you're smiling versus if you're like, I don't want to be here doing this. Is right. So as you grew the business, right, how did you decide? I think one thing that's hard, right, like I start a company and I'm, let's say I'm the CTO. Maybe there's two people now. So there's a CTO and there's somebody else who's the business person in the organization. And you start to grow. It's like, how do you decide which pieces, like, hey, based on what's happening in your company, how do you make a decision on who the next hire is? And kind of growing and scaling. Because I think you have to reach a pain point.
Yes.
And then you go like, oh, now I got to do something because now it's become unbearable. And I think, and entrepreneurs, like I said, being control freaks, right? We kind of take it till it's the unbearable point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And usually maybe a little bit beyond that, just because we're kind of gluttons for
someone else has
anyway.
to tell you, look.
Right, like, what's wrong with you? You're never going to go any further if you don't keep doing this. So how did you make those decisions along the way? Because you ran your company really lean, which is a great thing.
Yes, extremely lean. And it had to do with what you talked about, which is the fact that we had, no outside funding. So we were very, very frugal. And so every single employee was money out of my pocket, directly out of it. So I was like, I was going to do everything I can. So I think one is when I started feeling that pain, the first thing I would do was like, I'd be like, first thing, I'm going to automate. So to automate as much as possible. So I would say, okay, what is this person doing? And take a look at everything that they're doing, and then try to like create a computer program maybe that could, solve what they're doing. I was able to get rid of a lot, but still, eventually you're growing, your business is growing, it's still not enough. So then you have to make that new hire. So maybe it's a new customer service person or whatever. So I think it was pretty much what you said. It was just being forced into it. I'd be like, okay, I got to do it.
So the automation thing is really cool. So I know that that's like a big deal to you. And I think it's something that people struggle with, particularly non-technical, right? I think if you're an engineer, it's easier for you to go like, I can fix that problem.
That. Yes,
I know how to do that. I'll remedy that. Mm-hmm. How did you decide what to automate? What would be the most efficient way to do that? Because for me, I was just like, I tried to automate everything, but maybe for the point of view of someone who is not technical, gosh, that's a tough one, because it's basically, I do have my technical background, I'd go, look, that's anything that was a repetitive task, repetitive and didn't require too much thinking. So I tried to always, first of all, simplify the process that the person was doing. Like an example would be like the verifications that we were talking about for calling people. Okay.
At first, it was just like, all right, call that person and make sure they're real. Okay, that's not something that one. It's not something that you can duplicate. You can't measure. You can't manage. You can't do anything. So once I figured out what we were doing, then it was like, okay, well, how do I streamline the process? So let's make the process itself more efficient. So once it became, and then it was like, okay, there's actually like 7 steps that need to be done. It's complicated. Is it a credit card? Is it this? Is it that? Or that? But really, if you can create a flow chart. So I created a flow chart out of it. It's like, okay. And once I have the flow chart, then I'm like, okay, that can be automated. That can be automated. That can be automated. So that's
kind of back to the documentation thing, right? So if you really are kind of anal about going through documenting all the things that are going on in your organization, then it makes it easier to kind of find those things you think that can be
Yes.
automated.
Yes,
So
exactly.
even if you're a non-technical founder, right? If you
Yes.
did that process, then if you've got technical resources, right? Either there's a CTO in there, or somebody writing code, or you're going to hire somebody to do
Yes.
that. You should be able to kind of look at that and sort of look at, oh, these are the things that seem to be repetitive, don't necessarily require human intervention
Yes.
in order to do it, and pick those out.
Yes.
Because I mean, I'm a big believer. If you can automate things, it saves a lot of time, and it also allows scale. Right?
Yes.
That's the other problem, because the other problem that entrepreneurs are faced with, right, is how do I scale? And if everything you do requires adding a body, that becomes a little painful.
Yeah, it's very expensive.
And you know, just trying to find the right, even if it's not a money side, right, of paying the person, even if there's no much capital there, it's the time associated
To
with
invest
finding the right
in,
person, training the right person, and bringing them on board. And then if they leave or they do this or they do that, right, you have to go through that process all over again.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Cool. So there's one other thing I want to talk about related to vWorker that I think is interesting. So like RentACoder became vWorker after you decided to move beyond just developers, right?
Right, exactly, yes.
And so how did you make that decision, and which market? So we talked about you targeted entrepreneurs, and then you went to something else which kind of really made it explode, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. So how did I get to that decision? Well, again, I guess I was forced into it. It was like, I guess that's the theme here. But basically, I was like, okay, growth had been going great. And then all of a sudden it started slowing down. And I was like, we're getting to a plateau here. It's like, what do I need to do to get it kickstarted? So actually, before even trying that, I tried other things. I thought, well, maybe we need some new features. And I was like, trying new features, adding things, doing all sorts of things. And it helped a little bit, but nothing really kickstarted it. And it was another book that I had read, and it talked about the fact that really, there's a life cycle to every single one of the products and services that you create. There's going to be a growth phase, there's going to be a coasting off phase, and there's eventually a death phase. And if you are just a one-trick pony, that is going to be the phase. That's what your company is going to look like too.
Right.
So the key is basically, you have your one, and then you have your second one coming off, and then your third one coming off. So I thought, okay, that's what I need to do. So I looked at the miscellaneous category of the site, and I was like, man, a bunch of people are like misusing the site, because they're like, this is supposed to be for programmers. I had it like perfectly honed for programmers, all the questions and everything, and yet they were still using it to hire writers. And I was like, who would even go to a site called RentACoder to hire writers? But there were a lot of people doing it. So I was like, okay, despite me messing these people up.
You had some crazy stuff in your SEO, that was the problem. So it's like,
maybe that was it, yes. And so they were just like, yeah, this seems good enough. So I was like, okay, well, this is it. This is what I'm looking for. So I'm going to have to, so again, I had learned from Crossing the Chasm that I was like, so many companies fail by just going too big. And they're like, okay, I want to grab the whole market. So like if I'd gone with that technique, it would have been like, okay, we now offer all sorts of work for all sorts of workers. And your marketing just gets spread all over the place, and so many companies have gone out of business that way. So I was like, I need a niche.
You're having to pay for that marketing too, right? I mean, like technically, because to get those new customers, right, you're either paying for ads.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Or you're paying for SEO. You kind of got one or the other. Or
That's
you're doing
right.
it yourself. Either way, you're paying.
Yes. Somehow you have to pay for it. It's not free. And the type of SEO or the type of marketing or the type of ads for attracting writers is going to be completely different from translators, from graphic design artists.
And the employers are going to hire them.
Yes,
right? So
exactly.
you got both sides of the equation.
Exactly.
Because you got to make both people happy every time.
Yes. So I was like, I can't do that. And which is interesting is all the competitors actually had gone the opposite route. So, and I was like, well, that was kind of our strength always, was the fact that we were just programmers. So I don't want to lose that in trying to get bigger. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to just go after one little market. And if we can do that one, then I'll go after another little market. So it started off with writers. And basically, it was very painful. Because I thought I knew, after all these iterations of the site, I thought, oh yeah, I totally understand now, the customer, all this sort of stuff, and how to talk to them and how to market to them. I had no clue. The people that are hiring for writing are just completely different from what I had dealt with. A lot more logical on the programming side and less of that on the writing side, and appealing to logic, which is the wrong idea.
Analyticals, right? So it's kind of hard. It's like,
exactly.
Okay.
So it was definitely a learning experience. So I had to rebrand the site, because our site was kind of the site was maybe like programmer, industrial, you know, it was just like it had a certain tone to it that was really turning off these people. So had to rebrand the entire
Hey, you
site.
had a warm fuzzy on vWorker, and you didn't actually have that on RentACoder. So
Yes. Did you like that? Thank you. That was the goal. That was definitely the goal. Good, good. So yeah, so it was to make it more of a warm fuzzy and make people, you know, more comfortable with it and not some, you know, scary brand, as kind of industrial brand is what we were before. So doing that, doing new cards, doing everything. So it actually was a pretty expensive rebranding process to go through. Redid the whole entire website. Again, a lot of work, but
Right.
in the end, I mean, oh my goodness.
You actually hired developers on the second time around, though, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Thankfully, it wasn't me doing it by then. Yes, although I still was doing quite a bit of
sure.
work. Yes, on it. I was like the head programmer, and then I had like other programmers underneath me. But it made such a difference. But the key difference was with the media, because before we had gotten some good press. So we'd been in the Wall Street Journal.
You had really good articles that I've written about you.
Yes, Business Week. There had been some good ones, but we still were just a niche. So
You were a niche, but you were the leader in your space. So you were absolutely the market leader in that
Thank
space.
you. Yes, we were. So it was helpful. But what I found is that after I rebranded into this larger thing, all of a sudden the site became kind of like the solution to the bad economy. So it just like bloomed.
That's like 08, 09
Exactly.
timeframe? Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
So, you know, it wasn't like, you know, it was things were heading down. So,
But all the unemployed people, right?
Yes.
Everybody who got fired or laid off, right? Now you've got all these workers who are honestly pretty skilled workers, and you know, worker has its own terminology in different cultures, but you had all these people who had great skills but were no longer employable.
Yes.
Or employed, right? Because the job market is overall had shrunk.
Exactly.
So now you had a lot more potential.
It was good
people to work.
timing. Yes, very, very good timing. So that helped on that side too as well. So yeah, so with the rebranding, all of a sudden there were interviews with, you know, different news agencies and stuff like that. They were like, wow, look, you can work from home, you know, that sort of thing. And so it really took off.
Because you were like in Fast Company after that, and a whole bunch of other stuff. and
That was like
everything,
Fox
so it's like-
News, you know, some of those guys.
Yeah. You got a lot of TV
Yes.
coverage in that time frame. At the same time, right, those same people who were unemployed would have been watching the news, and the people who would potentially hire them were watching the news.
Yes, that's exactly right. You're right. It was like all TV at that time.
So did you, out of curiosity, right, so I'm sure some of those people just approached you, but
Some
after you
did.
kind of figured that out, did you go the other way?
As far as like, I did. I tried to pitch,
like-
of course.
yeah.
Yes. So try to pitch as much as possible. I had varying success, you know. Yeah, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't.
But you're a very personable guy and that kind of stuff. Like
I try to be.
How did the Inc. magazine article really play? Because that was an awesome article for what you guys were.
Yeah. That one was really awesome. In fact, they even kind of like helped us. They said that we were like a crowdsourcing
They
site.
did, which was really cool. Which was a hot term.
It was a super hot term,
like,
which we
whoa.
weren't even marketing on. I was like, cool, we can just jump on
everything
this.
on this now. It's like it's everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So it was pretty awesome. I mean, I wish I could say that I did it myself, but I didn't. They kind of found me. It was just one of those
But
things
you
that
were
was
featured
serendipitous.
with other awesome companies. So I think that actually
Yes,
helped a lot too.
it did
right?
help, so I had the
'cause they were like
credibility.
picking all the trendy companies at the time that they were
Yes.
profiling.
Yes, exactly. So that did help. So it was all the other publicity, hopefully all building together to kind of build snowball.
But you did something else that was interesting that maybe your competitors did, but they weren't very vocal about it because your whole affiliate program.
Oh.
So talk a little bit about that, because like you had a giant like affiliate tab on your
That's
site,
right.
and that is not what anybody else was doing.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk about that and why you did that and how that impacted the business.
That was a secret weapon there. So it was like, so basically, you know, we spent a lot of money on advertising and things like that, and marketing and SEO, and all those things did work. But the number one referral source was actually, you know, happy customers referring other people. So while you were exactly right, the other competitors didn't really think about that. They had huge budgets. So they were just going to spend their budgets.
They had a bunch of
and
venture
stuff like
capital, it's okay.
Exactly. So it didn't really matter. So I was like, well, I have to be smarter than that. So I created an affiliate program. And the idea was that with this affiliate program, every single one of them, whoever they referred to us, well, the other ones eventually copied it, and they were like, okay, we'll give them, you know, $50 or something every time they referred someone. But I said, you know what? I want to make these people my partners. I want them to refer me. I want them to refer people over and over and over again. So I said, you know what? I'm going to share lifetime revenues with these people. So I'm going to give them, so like 1/3 of the profits that we're making on this, we're just going to give them to them. And if they can just continue doing that, that's like a free advertising source. So we'll easily give away those profits. And so that was the secret. Yeah, that was a secret.
I mean, I think it's interesting because it's not when people think affiliate, right? They have a completely different mindset
Yes.
to what they think affiliate is. And I think what you guys did really was different. And I don't even know anybody who's really doing it today.
Yeah, yeah. People aren't that generous maybe with their affiliates, or I don't want to say they rip them off, but they hold them at arm's length.
Right.
And whereas I was like, please
But your
come.
affiliates technically aren't just affiliates. They really are business partners.
Yes.
You actually had a channel. So to Jeffrey Moore's
You're
book,
right.
right? You actually kind of created your own channel.
Yes,
And a
yes.
very loyal channel because these were people who were already doing business with you. They already loved the service. So there wasn't a real risk for them recommending
Yes, recommending me. They already were using the service. They liked it enough, and they just get paid. So yeah.
So let's talk about, because I want to get to PB&J in
Okay.
a minute. So, and I want to ask some other questions. So talk a little bit, so you build a company, you grow it, right? At the end, you guys were about 18 full-time employees.
Yes.
What did the jobs, and I'll use jobs as a term, that you created look like at the time that you got acquired? How many were there maybe in the US and how many overseas?
Well, those 18 were
approximately?
here.
Yeah, they were full-time here.
Yes, and I also had additional staff like overseas and stuff like
Yep.
that. But so the ones over here were almost all customer service. I had a ton of customer service.
Okay.
So that was another key differentiator between us and the competition. The other guys, they would you would send an email to them and they would write back maybe in a day or something like that, maybe. So with us, it was just like always there was someone would always answer the phone immediately. And so we'd get back to people if we had to take a message, within a couple hours. So I ended up having a lot of, for like about 50% were customer service people. Actually more, it was probably about 60 or 70% customer service people. I cross-trained them some of them to do non-technical arbitrations. So that kind of took off some of the load there. And the rest of the people were all arbitrators. And then I had 2 programmers that were here. And then the rest were all overseas people.
And so in the end, right, I mean, you basically went from zero. And people, like a lot of people have the misconception, right, that Ian did this in like 3 years and he was a gazillionaire. Not quite like that.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, it's just like, it was slow building.
Because you technically started like your
over
first
time.
company like in like 95 or something, right? And
Yeah, that's right.
then you started RentACoder like around 2000, is that about
Yep,
right?
2001, yeah, right
And
around
ultimately sold in 2011, 2012?
end of 2011, yes.
Okay. And so, I mean, technically it took you about 11 years
That's
to
right.
build that
To be an
business.
overnight success, that's right.
I think that's a lot more normal than one
Yes,
going
exactly.
on the other side. So, but you ran it very, very lean. I mean, so to build a company from nothing to ultimately $130 million with 18 employees is pretty amazing.
Thank you.
With no venture capital. But I think, and people not like this, I say it, but I think venture capital makes you lazy. And I say that because I've raised a lot of venture capital and we were raising it in companies where we had very long sales cycles and we had very large, volume.
Okay, yes.
If you're selling a solution that the minimum buy-in is $1 million and you've got a 12-month sales cycle, that's quite a different scenario. But I also think that when, somebody writes you a check for, in our case, like in some cases, $25 million at a time.
Yes.
You don't necessarily always make the best decisions because you've got a pretty big buffer there.
I agree. I mean, it happened over and over again with us, even our competitors. So more recently, I mean, I won't name names, but basically the competitor that was considered the #1 competitor, the largest, okay, first of all, they made me tear out my hair because trying to compete against guys with that much money and, trying to run Google AdWords and trying to run all these other things when they can just run circles around you is like really, really difficult.
And you mean when their ad budget for a day is what yours is for the year? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're spending millions and millions just on one, search engine, just on Google,
right.
Or just on Bing, or just on. It's like, it was crazy. So, but what ended up happening is that particular company that was the #1 largest billing, everything like that. They ended up, they weren't acquired per se, but basically they kind of folded themselves under the #2 company, and the CEO took a demotion and all that sort of thing. They were just spending way too much money, and there was no path to profitability.
Well, eventually the VCs like kind of go like, okay, throwing more good money after bad is not really very smart.
It's like we got to get in, and there's no, and it's difficult these days. The IPO exit is not what it used to be. So it's like for most companies, that's not going to be the way that you get out. So hopefully you're going to find an acquirer usually or something like that.
I don't think most people realize. I mean, like I've done the IPO thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't realize that today to do an IPO, you really need 18 months of profitability consecutively in order to even to apply to the SEC to actually go public, which means that reality is you need to be able to sustain that for another 6 to 12 months beyond that, and that's pretty hard to do.
Yes.
There are some anomalies. There are some anomalies.
Yes, and there's a few people that are able to do it, and
to do it with
good
no
for
money,
them.
like Twitter.
Exactly,
right?
yes.
But that's not normal.
Yes.
And that has a lot to do with who your backers are and how you do that and what their relationships are on the SEC.
That's true too. I'm sure
So it's,
connections help.
But they also have huge adoption rates in order to accomplish that too. So even though they may not have the profitability, they have huge adoption rates. And it's hard. I mean, I think that's the 1 in 100 million shot.
Right.
And which kind of brings me to my next question, right? So you've been acquired, I've been acquired, you kind of know that. Talk a little bit about what entrepreneurs can do to kind of protect themselves and actually derive a higher price when they get acquired.
Okay, so what I would say, to be honest, the best thing to get a higher price, have more than one bidder. So if you basically have one bidder, it's going to be a multiple. Maybe it's going to be a multiple of your revenues, or it's going to be maybe a multiple of your profits. It's going to be some sort of multiple, but it's going to be a lot lower than what you want. Right. That's fine. Get that first offer from the first one, and then shop it around to some other people. That's actually what happened with me. So I was fortunate I was able to do that. And then that gets you up to where you're no longer talking about a multiple. You're talking about how much is this worth to you,
right?
And how much are you willing to pay for it. So
and
that was
how
the
much is
biggest
it worth to you to not have your competitor buy it?
To have your competitor buy it. That is true. Exactly. Yes. Which is a lot more.
It is. It definitely is. I mean, the other thing, like we were talking about earlier, right? I think that you did some things to protect yourself legally and with your intellectual property, right?
Yes.
And we were talking about kind of like I did that with Velocity. So talk a little bit about that, because I think that people have a tendency to not have an operating agreement, not structure things. And I'll figure that out. It's like, it's kind of like ready, fire, aim.
Yes.
And I understand that when you have no money. I mean, I get it. But my personal opinion is there are some things you should find the money for to protect yourself downstream. Because if you make a bad choice, there was an article, came out a couple of days ago, one of the co-founders is suing another company, right?
Okay.
The college students, I don't know if you saw it. So there were 3 that founded a company together. The other 2 kind of wanted to kick the guy. They wanted to buy him out. He said no.
Okay.
They kind of came back and said, well, that's really cool. We're just going to go do our own thing. So they founded another company.
Okay.
And kicked him to the curb, took the only product they had and brought him to the new company. And now he's suing and he will win, guaranteed.
Yeah, definitely. And I was working with a startup, and they got some funding, got a product developed. They didn't seal down that contract with the developer, and when things went south, the developer owned the product, so they had nothing. So I mean, if you're in a tech startup, that's like the number one thing. So you've got to get those agreements in place. People don't really think about who owns it. They're like, oh well, I paid for it, I must own it. It's like, no, you don't necessarily own it. Right. There might be a few copyrights sitting in your source code that you've never even seen, and all of a sudden it's going to be a problem. One of my employees, his dad was what his job was at IBM when they would acquire companies, he would go into the source code and look for those little copyright things, and every single time he found one, it's like, okay, we have a problem here. You're going to have to pay off that person there in order for the sale to go through, or it's not going to go through. So basically, you need to have a good contract. There's wording that you can put in there. It's like, work for hire, I own full 100% copyright, I own all the source code. That's something else that a lot of entrepreneurs get nailed with, where they own the program but not the source code, which is the thing that allows them to change it.
Right.
So now all of a sudden it's like they need to fix bugs and they can't.
It's like, I don't know what to do with that, right? It's like,
And the developer's like, well, you can pay more money. And you're like, what? I paid for this. You're going to you're holding me hostage.
Right.
So yeah, really important to do all that stuff.
So it's kind of cool. So you built a company, right? You sold the company for a nice profit, and we won't talk about how much,
Thank you.
to Freelancer, right? So you kind of sold it to the biggest name out there in the end. Fast forward, you kind of promised your wife that you'll take a little time off from work, which is kind of hard for an entrepreneur, but you had a brand new baby.
That's right.
So literally during the acquisition or like right after the acquisition, right?
It was right. It was a couple months. It was several months later, but yes.
You know.
Like I knew it was coming during the
I
acquisition.
mean, because your wife was like, what, 6 months pregnant or something at
Right,
the time?
exactly.
So it was
Yes.
like, so a little stress there, right? So you kind of committed to taking some time off. So you know, took some time off, got
Yes,
to, you know, you did some traveling, you got to hang out with your wife and your new baby.
It was
and
really
all those
nice.
things.
Yes, after working those crazy hours, really, really nice.
And then the end is always kind of crazy for that little rat race there.
Yes.
So, you know, you kind of like breathe. Okay, great. You know, we'll move on. So then you kind of hung out for a little while, but being restless, like most entrepreneurs are, right? You came up with this idea for, you know, peanut butter and jelly games. So were you making a PB&J sandwich at the time, or how did you come up with that?
I love, you know, I eat low carb now, but my favorite, always as a kid, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So it's just like, and I was trying to think of a fun name for a game company that everyone could identify with, and I thought, I think everyone likes peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, so that's the name.
So how did you decide to do this? I mean, it's kind of interesting. Talk a little bit about it, and like what made you decide to do it. And the games are kind of cool, even though they're not legal in Florida.
Yeah, you can't play them in Florida yet, unfortunately. But you know, maybe if the laws change here.
But you can play in most states.
Yes, you can play in something like 40-something states.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's basically you can play a 60-second game. It's a puzzle game on a mobile phone for money, and it's legal. So, so there's a couple of things there. So basically, you asked how I got into it. I was actually advising another startup, and they were kind of in a related field. They were like in fantasy sports. And that's when I was kind of looking at the law, and I realized, I was like, well, I never realized it's actually legal. It's illegal to gamble on a game of chance, but if you play a game of skill for money, it's actually legal in most states. And I thought, oh, this is crazy. I've never even heard of this. Why aren't there like 1 million people doing this? I don't understand it. So, so basically I was like, okay, well, one reason why is just because it's a legal rat's nest. Every single state is like completely different.
Right.
So there was a lot of legal work to get into, like to establish all those different things and find out which states it could be done in. But I was able to do it. So I thought, wow, okay. So basically it's a puzzle game that people play for money, and by removing all the elements of luck. So for example, like if we were playing against each other, we wouldn't have a different set of tiles. We would have the exact same set of tiles. So it's basically just based on your skill versus my skill. So that was basically the way.
So that whole Rubik's Cube thing came right back around.
That's right, it did.
I mean, so there's one game out now, right? Are you doing others?
Yes.
Are there going to be more?
There will be more, yes. So currently there's one called Dollar Candy, and basically what it is, it's a puzzle game, and people basically have, it's like a bunch of tiles, and people kind of match the different tiles, but rather than matching like if you remember that game Concentration, where when you were a kid, you would match like, the 5 with the 5. Right. So in this case, things like that can be cheated by a computer. And people are playing for money. It's like there better not be any cheating going on. So the games are all designed actually where a human plays them better than a computer. So which is not, so that was the other challenging thing. How do you make something like that that's also fun? That's like,
so what you're telling me is also an algorithmic genius. Is that what you're telling me?
I basically just came up with did a lot of thinking of trying to figure out some way to do this.
Okay.
But what it is, you and I as humans, we are really good at recognizing patterns that computers can't do.
Right.
One thing is like you would look at like maybe a picture of an ostrich and a cartoon, and you go, oh, those are the same things. Even though the ostrich is totally looking in a different way, maybe one ostrich has its head in the ground, you can't even see the head and stuff like that. A computer is not going to be able to distinguish between the two. So that's what this first game is. And actually I have 2 other games too, which are similar things, so it's fun. It's like matching as quickly as you can all these different little tiles. It's like a cartoon of an ostrich with a picture of an ostrich, and trying to beat 3 other people. And if you beat the 3 other people, actually in some of the games you only have to beat 1 person, then you win. Just depending if you want to play recreationally or competitively.
So I can win a whole bunch of stuff while I'm standing in line at Starbucks.
That's right, exactly. So that's the idea.
And maybe one day in Florida.
Yes, hopefully so. Yeah, there's a rule in Florida. I don't know if you were aware that what had happened is these senior citizens were going to these what they call internet cafes. Yeah, you heard about that? So yeah, and they were actually gambling in there. They had slot machines, and the way they got around the law is they said that basically they could kind of control the slot machine, like when it ended. So normal slot machine, you pull it and it just kind of spins. But in this one, it's like you could pull it and then you could release it. And when you released it, that kind of controlled when it was. So they go, oh, it's a game of skill. And so they tried to shut them down, and they realized, no, that's completely legal actually in Florida. So they had to create a law specifically to shut it down. And in doing that, they've now it's gone completely overboard. It's now made any device, including like a phone or a computer, that could possibly play that sort of thing, it's considered a slot machine now. So we've gone to the complete opposite. So
Awesome. I didn't realize my iPhone was a slot machine.
yeah, exactly. So because of that, Florida probably not going to happen for a while, but it could be challenged. Who knows?
So I want to talk to you a little bit about like tips for entrepreneurs,
Okay.
right? Because I think you've done some really cool stuff and you have a different way of looking at things. So do you believe there's some sort of pattern, right, or formula to becoming a successful entrepreneur?
I definitely think there's some important things that need to be done. Yes, I mean
Okay.
it requires someone that is well. Okay, I can only tell you what happened in my case. Hopefully, I think it applies to others. But it's basically, I think the number one thing is basically just persistence, because it's like I've been knocked down so many times. It's like that proverb, it's I think like fall down 12 times, stand up 13. So it's just like I think that's the number one thing. It's persistence. There was like this study that was done on, it was, I think, University of Wisconsin or one of the universities. And they were trying to see what makes people successful. And they were like, well, is it, the people that are the smartest? Is it, and they analyzed everybody. They analyzed like West Point cadets. They analyzed sports people. They analyzed people that were playing in the band, spelling bees, every single thing that you possibly imagine. And what's common between all these different things? And is it the smartest? And it was like, no, it's not the smartest. Well, maybe it's the most talented. Because a lot of these are sports and stuff like that. Not even for sports is not even the most talented. A lot of times people practice. The practicing is what makes them good. Is it the people maybe it's the people that have the most charisma or the biggest EQ or, try to measure all these things, they couldn't find it. And the one thing was what they called grit, which was, there's like two parts to grit. Like one is like, you're willing to do nasty stuff that no one else is willing to do. And so they give an example of the spelling bee. The kids that did well at the spelling bee, well, the normal kid is basically a kid that they go over a bunch of problems, a bunch of the words, and then they're like, oh, I know these. Let me drill over the ones that I know. Those are the easy ones. The ones that did really good were the ones that did the really hard. They basically stayed all the time outside of their comfort zone and were working on the really, really hard stuff. And those are the ones that succeed. So that's half of grit, is like working on things that are not fun, but doing it. And the other part is sticking to it. I think if you can do those two things, those are really the most important.
Well, I agree with that. I think that, because like I think about like, me, I'm not the smartest, I'm not this, I'm not that, but tenacity, I got that, and I do think that matters. And it's funny, like you talk about athletes. So when I was in ninth grade, I'd played basketball with your school, through college and everything else. And so it's interesting because I missed the tryout. I was really, really sick. And so they filled the team, right? And I didn't get to participate. So like about 2 weeks later, one of the girls got transferred to another school, so there was one slot on the team. Like 35 of us went out. And I got the spot, and I eventually made the first team, right, as well. After like 2 rounds, but it wasn't because I was the best player. It's just because I can tell you right now, it's because I willed it to be. I wanted it more. I was willing to do whatever it took to do that. Because we had a girl who's 5'5" who could slam like a basketball on our team. So it's
crazy.
It wasn't that. So it definitely was tenacity in the end. So talk a little bit about like what really excites you, like kind of going forward. Are there things that you think are going to be like game changers? In the environment, things that people like who are budding entrepreneurs might want to look at?
Oh, I mean, so many things. I mean, it's just like technology is going crazy. We were talking about 3D printing, and it's just like 3D printing, I think, is really just going to take over everything. You've got 3D printing of houses now, where this guy has this super huge 3D printer that's like the shape of a garage, and he's printing a house. He's printing a room. So the room gets laid out. It's
like
extruded.
A modular home, really?
Yeah,
wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's extruded from this thing. The bricks have the wires already built into them, so it's all perfectly wired. It's got perfect insulation, and he can build a room in like an hour. So yeah, and it's like cheap.
Wow.
So okay, so that's one example of 3D printing. You've got 3D printing of organs and things like that, where that's just going to revolutionize everything. I mean, 3D printing is just, there's so many different things, so that's pretty exciting.
Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million things.
So give me another, right? Because I mean, obviously you're doing the game thing. You've got 3D printing.
Yes.
Give me 2 more that you think are just like going to rock this place.
I mean, nanotechnology. I mean, it's just like there is so much going on with it. As things get smaller and smaller, it becomes so much easier to do much more powerful things. And right now, a lot of the nanotechnology is kind of like where you think, oh, well, this has got like nanotechnology in it to like make my material smoother and stuff like that. But that's just a tiny bit of nanotechnology. As things are starting to get smaller and smaller, there's the idea. I've been reading an awesome book recently about the idea of how you actually manufacture things on the atomic level. And we're getting to the point where it's basically a machine inside a machine inside a machine inside a machine. And you basically, when you can manipulate things at the small level, you have that machine that does it. So it's like, imagine like a room, a very tiny room. It's got like a bunch of boxes on one side. Those are the little raw elements that you feed into this thing. And they figured out the size, that the atomic size these things need to be. And then they have this thing that can just manipulate the atoms, and so can join them together. Places them into the output, which is basically comes out of this little room. Now, once you come out of that little room becomes one of the boxes in the next room. So that's the input. And so then it repeats again. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It might go like 70 or 80 times, but basically that's it. So it's like you've got all these crazy ideas that people are coming up with to work in the area that are very small.
So are there any tools that you use that you think are really awesome, like software products that you just think are amazing?
That are awesome? Well, we were talking about one that I love Mint. Yeah. Mint is just awesome. It's just like, for those that don't use it, it's just like it pulls in all your accounts and everything. And I mean, I never really understood before my financial situation completely. Like, because you have your credit card bills and your accounts are always changing. It instantly shows you what it is, and you can set up alerts, so you can be like, yeah, I spent a little bit too much, this month. Okay, I gotta calm it down a little bit. Or like, whoa, okay, things are looking good. So it's totally revolutionized how I manage my finances. That's one tool that I like a lot.
Cool. So legacy, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you're gonna kick the bucket anytime soon.
Thank
so
you.
A little young to think about this, but what do you want your legacy to be? I mean, you've accomplished a lot. I mean, you worked really hard to get what where you are. But you've accomplished a lot. You've given a lot back philanthropically. Like a lot of people I don't think actually know, that in addition to like vWorker empowering all these people who are in countries that have never had the option, you actually give a lot of your own time and your own money to a whole lot of other philanthropic efforts. So when Ippolito is remembered, what would you want your legacy to be?
Gosh, well, that is a really important thing too, because it's just like as far as giving that back. But as far as like the entrepreneur community, I mean, I really think that there's kind of a responsibility for, and we're doing it right now, but for people like us who have been able to, to find a way to get things done, to kind of give it back to them. So, I get together all the time with all sorts of, young entrepreneurs who are just like, hey, I'm just starting out, what do I do? And so I mean, I guess I would like it if it was my epitaph or whatever. It's just like someone that was generous and recognized that okay, a lot of what I did was through hard work and through coming up with ideas and stuff like that. But there is an element of luck and there's an element of timing involved. And I realized that someone can have all those other things all together and just not have the luck or timing. So I think there's almost like a responsibility to to assist others when you're in that situation.
I think you do a good job of that. I mean, you're a very approachable guy. You're really easy to talk to.
Thank you.
And I think that when people come to you, you're very generous. I think you appreciate what you've gotten, in life, even though you've worked really hard for it. And I think that shows. Which is
thank
cool.
you.
You're welcome. So now we're going to play the game,
okay.
Right? Like inside the actor's studio. So we're going to do some rapid fire stuff really quick.
Okay.
So just have to say the first thing that pops into your
All
head.
right. Okay.
And then when we're done, we're going to open up for questions and everybody can ask you like a million different questions, right? So aside from Jeffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, what's the one book you would recommend everybody read?
Ooh. Well, if I just jump what's on the top of my head, there's one that I've been reading recently. Gosh, you know what? I can't quote that one because I don't remember the title. And it was so awesome, too. It's talking about how to make decisions.
You can tweet it out later.
I'll tweet it out later. But a fantastic book on how to make decisions. Yeah, I'll tweet it later.
Okay, all right. In one word, characterize yourself as an entrepreneur.
Persistent. Dogged.
Do you work best with a pen and paper or digitally?
Oh, I'm really bad with pen and paper. Yeah, digitally.
What's more important, speed, strength, or stamina?
Ooh, well, I think stamina actually. Just like it's not a sprint. It usually is not. Usually it's a marathon.
So who do you think is amazing at what they do?
I mean, there's a ton of people that are amazing at what they do. Let's pick in the area of who's someone that I'm trying to think of. Well, we've got. How about in the area? Well, I was reading I've been reading like 6 biographies recently. And I've been reading about famous scientists. And one of them was Madame Curie. And, a lot of people don't really appreciate some of these older maybe scientists, and what they accomplished. But this was a woman who, in a time, so this is like 1890s.
Right.
And at a time when women were not allowed to even, be outside. A lot of times they had to be at home. Mm-hmm. She not only, was a scientist, which was like a complete, it was like a guy's thing.
Right.
But she won the Nobel Prize twice. Now, despite this, she still was not allowed into the French Academy, of scientists. They vote. They like had a vote thing, and they
Right.
wouldn't let her in. But so people like that I admire. I've been reading a lot of biographies, so it's like her, C.S. Lewis. I've been reading a bunch of really, really interesting people.
That's a good answer, actually. So excluding yours, what company or business do you admire most?
Company or business? I mean, it's hard not to admire Google. I know a lot of people maybe have some bad impressions about Google. Just maybe, it's like, they're not supposed to be evil, but, maybe they've kind of changed everyone. But look at from what they've done, it's just like these two guys came up with this algorithm. They really didn't know how to monetize it, but they just came up with an audience. And from that, they figured out a way to do it. And they are a cash-making machine.
Well, they've done some awesome things with the money that the evil maniacal machine has done as well.
Yes,
so they're doing some really cool stuff that people is not in the public eye.
Yes, and on the public eye,
so
yes.
like,
and the Google car, if that comes
the Google
out.
car is pretty bang. Like I was out in the valley, like watching them drive around, which is crazy.
That's
so it's
awesome.
like, So what item do you own that you would never sell?
Oh, that I own? You know what? I guess I'm not that. I do love my possessions. I mean, it's just like, but there's nothing that I've really, because that I bought that I would, maybe it would be, it would be, some of my old albums and things like that. Those are sort of things where it's like old pictures and things like that.
Oh.
Or like if my vault of pictures, were to disappear from the cloud or something like that, I guess. So maybe, maybe that would be it. All those memories would be gone. All those travel pictures, that would be, that would.
You have a backup of that, right? You're your tech guy.
Yeah, it's on the cloud.
Okay,
yes.
Okay.
It's like a nuclear war or something.
Okay. So what's your favorite word?
Favorite word? Speedy, which wasn't the answer to the other one, but I like it.
What profession other than yours would you like to do? Would you like to attempt?
Well, I mean, it's crazy. I was actually reading about the do-it-yourself biology, which is the newest thing here, which is the fact that these biologists who work with DNA are able to come up with new things. And it used to be that they would work in these huge labs, but now you can actually, the equipment has gotten so cheap that they can do it in their garages. If I could be someone else, it's like, I would love to get into that and just understand, DNA and tinker with that. But yeah, that would be ideal.
What makes you
in
happy?
Another world. You know what? I'm married to the most wonderful woman in the world. So it's just like my wife, my little boy.
Yes.
Gio. It's just like
he's like the cutest little kid too. It's like,
He just cracks me up all the time. His newest word is cheese, but he uses it on everything. So he's just like cheese, and he'll point to like a hot dog or something. Cheese, cheese, cheese.
Maybe he just really likes cheese.
Yeah, he might.
It could be. I don't know. So, what's your most unusual skill?
Unusual skill. I guess I could say that. I guess this is a skill. From a young age, I don't even know how to describe it. Basically, I would. If I'm sitting in a room and it's very quiet, like typically at night, I will literally hear some sort of music playing. Like it is like the music, like really like playing. So I don't know if it's really a skill or something weird or a defect or like a seizure going on or what it is, but very often that will happen.
As long as it's not voices talking to each other, we're okay. Like
I'm listening for those. Hopefully not. Yeah.
If you were an animal, what animal would you be?
I'd like the cheetah. The cheetah is, again, it's the speed.
I love it. That's my favorite.
Is that your favorite too?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
it's
the
like
cheetah is
the fastest
awesome.
animal on the planet.
It's the fastest. No one can catch you if you're the cheetah.
That's like.
Just got to worry about yourself. Don't slow down.
That's right. Don't slow down. That's like. And lastly, if you were conducting this interview, what question would you ask of yourself?
Oh gosh. I mean, first of all, you've done a really good job researching it because, which is actually very unusual. So I really appreciate it. What would I ask myself? I really can't think of anything.
Or something you would want to share, something that you think would be important to the people who are in the room. Like we've got students here, we've got entrepreneurs here.
Okay.
So what's something you would want to
share?
share?
That I would share with them?
Yeah.
Well, I laid out what I thought was like really important, and I do believe that persistence is important. But, so many of the young people that come up to me, they don't have some of these basics. So make sure, when you're starting that company, that you've got an idea that no one else is doing. It's got to be something different. So not just something that you think is wonderful, like I thought the power launcher was so wonderful, but it's got to be something that's unique, that you found a unique angle to, and that you hope that you can do better than anybody else. So, those are like the basics. You got to have those in place. So once you have that, then you can start building on it. So that's what I would recommend.
Awesome. Well, hey, give Ian a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
He can't clap because he injured himself while, doing sports. But I want to open it up for questions. I mean, you've got a great opportunity. Ian has done phenomenal things, so I would encourage everybody to ask questions. Anybody?
Anybody?
Going back to freelancers and things, a lot of us are web developers, project managers. The biggest problem I see is scope creep on a project. And so what did you find is the 3 best things to do or 4 best things to help prevent that along the way? I mean, of course, there's contracts and things, but maybe explaining the expectations and things like that. But if you can kind of talk about that, that'd be great.
And you're coming at from the point of view of the entrepreneur hiring a programmer, right?
No,
Not
actually, as from
you're
a
the
web developer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, from the developer point of view. Well, scope creep is like, it's almost impossible to stop. Because it's just like, the problem is that every person developing the software, when they have the idea, you can't visualize the whole piece of software. You just really can't. So, I mean, it's almost inevitable. So, I mean, one of the things is like, I would recommend, I would tell the programmers, 1, budget for it. So it's gonna happen, typically, I would double whatever you think that it's gonna be and assume that's gonna happen. Now, at the same time, you have to manage it. So he said that, that's not quite good enough. So there's things that you can do. For one thing, it's like, a lot of times you can explain to the entrepreneur, what's going on. Because they come to you and they're like, okay, entrepreneur, whoever the client is, I'm assuming it's an entrepreneur. But it's just like, okay, I want to add this. And then you're the programmer and you're like, I didn't budget for that at all. I didn't think that you were going to need that. So explain it in terms of trade-offs. It's like, if this wasn't in the original thing, I can do it. It will take me this much more time, and it will take you this much more money. And there definitely should be that discussion. It should be always like, okay, this is not what we originally agreed upon. This is what it's going to take. I think once they really realize that they can't just add things, willy-nilly. But at the same time, I don't think it's a good idea to just totally cut off all scope creep, because you're going to end up with a dissatisfied customer. So like I said, so add that extra buffer. Kind of like be generous on a few things, maybe about 10% or 10 to 15%, assume it, and then the rest, really manage it. That's what I would recommend.
Sylvia?
What are some of the programming languages you adapted and why?
Now, so originally I was all Microsoft. So I did like active server pages, I did Visual Basic, ASP.NET, that sort of thing. And so it started off in ASP Classic, and then as the technology kind of went on, it moved into that and SQL Server. These days a lot of the stuff is written in what's called LAMP, which is, it's got PHP, and it's an open source. I probably, if I would have started off today, I would do it in that. It's just like, it's cheap, it's free. There's so many more developers. Because it's free, more developers have the software. So as a result, it's much easier if I wanted to outsource it overseas. More people have it. I can probably get better pricing, that sort of thing.
Cool. Tracy?
On the acquisition side, when you were doing that, we only talked about a little bit, and anything you can't say, don't say, but you talked about having multiple people interested. And at that point, did you start pitching, or did they start coming to you? And can you talk about that part anymore?
Yeah, I can definitely talk a little bit about it. So, so what had happened is the CEO of Freelancer, Matt Berry, he had been bugging me a lot. Like, he'd been sending me emails every couple months, and he'd be like, "So, when are you going to sell?" And
how big a check are you writing?
Yeah, exactly. And and it's easy now to know that he was serious, but my problem was I didn't know if he was serious
just
or
fishing,
not.
right?
Yeah, exactly. He could have been just trying to figure out what our secrets were, and so I blew him off. I blew him off many, many times, and But he was persistent. So so he kept on doing it. Every few months he would send me an email. I'd be like, no, not interested. What sealed the deal, or to start talking, was the fact that he purchased the number 5 site, Scriptlance, and he said, hey Ian, guess what? We bought another site. Why don't you talk to that CEO and see how we dealt with him? See that we did a good job. And I said, okay. So I called that guy up, and he was so happy. I called him on the phone. Yes, it was really good. He was like, Ian, I'm going on a trip around the world. And I was like, well, okay, that sounds pretty good. So I was like, okay, these guys are serious, So that's what started it. And then once I talked to them, so I hadn't really thought about selling it, to be honest. But it actually was, I was thinking about my son coming and all that. And I was like, what, I can't keep up this schedule and stuff like that. So I was like, I should talk to them. So we talked to them. They came up with a price. And I was like, no, that's not going to work. I'm not selling it for that price. So that's when, and they go, well, that's pretty much what it's worth. That's a couple times, that's as high as we're going to come to. I said, okay. Well, let me just see what some other people would think about this. So that's when I went to the other people, and that's probably about all that I can say. But I can just say that basically, that's what was the key.
Okay, so after you had that, then you started going out and trying to solicit the other offers.
Exactly. I was just like, well, I have this offer from them. What do you guys think? Do you want them to buy it? So that's how I took it. Yes.
Very cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Did you stay with the company for a period of time? Did you have to agree to stay for?
Yes, it actually was really good. I mean, they basically said that for 6 months, each month I had to work like 5 hours or something like that. So they wanted me there just in case the software broke or something like that, and they just had like a problem with it. So it was a good deal. So I did my 6 months, and they held back some of the money. So that way they would make sure that I would actually do what I said I would do. So that worked out good.
Did they ultimately integrate? I mean, was the goal to integrate what you guys had with their platform? Was that the goal?
It should have been, and actually they didn't. And they kind of caught a lot of grief from our customers that went over to them, and they actually lost a lot. They didn't understand what we had. We have a time card system, that watched the workers and would record the desktop movements and the screen so you could see that they actually were working, rather than just saying,
hey, I logged in and I'm now goofing off watching something on YouTube. That's awesome.
Exactly. Or playing Minesweeper, or I'm on Facebook. So it's like, okay, you would only have to pay them. So they didn't understand that that's like really important. So they just came, and I thought actually that they were going to do a bunch of integration, and they didn't. And they were just like, oh, we're just turning off the vWorker now after a couple months. And there was like a huge rebellion, and people were like, what? They were in the middle of getting paid. They messed with people's rice bowl. And so, you can't do that. And so, people still complain about it to this day, what they did.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Arjun?
Company, have you thought about the way of getting around Florida laws with the cash for gifts?
To give outside? Well, it is possible. Like maybe someone could create something like that, where maybe it was gifts, like a sweepstakes or something like that. But I was really, to me, the most compelling thing is cash. So for me I think rather than water it down to make it like gifts and stuff like that, I think I would I would probably just wait. That's just my decision. Someone else might make a different decision.
So a little casino down in Sarasota, and they actually just give Visa gift cards because it's still considered a gift. It's cash.
I wonder if they can get away with how long they can get away with that for.
Well, they've been doing it for many years, so.
We'll have to check it out then, see how they do that.
Maybe there's something else.
Yeah. Learn something new, yeah.
Just have a different company
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other questions that you want to ask publicly? All right, awesome. Hey, thank you guys very much. Thank Ian again for his time, because without him we couldn't do this.
Thank you.